You
The rain
people
had
are all the
started before
same. Get
dawn,
out of
a
my
soft,
diner!
relentless drizzle that blurred the city into shades of gray and silver. On the corner of Elm and Dawson stood a modest cafe called the Summit Grill, a neighborhood staple known more for its nostalgia than its food. To most passersby, it was just another ordinary diner, the kind of place where the coffee was always lukewarm, the floors always slightly sticky, and the regulars never changed. But to one man watching from across the street, it was far more than that. It was a test, a carefully laid trap. His name was Adrian Clark. To the world he was the founder and CEO of Clark Hospitality Group, a company that owned more than 100 restaurants across the country. His face had appeared on the covers of business magazines. His speeches about fairness and opportunity had gone viral online. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he wore a faded jacket with fraying seams, scuffed boots, and a cap pulled low over his face. In the mirror of a shop window, he barely recognized himself. That was the point. For months, Adrian had received complaints, emails from customers, messages from former staff, whispers from people who'd felt humiliated after walking into this very diner. Words like racist, hostile, and disrespectful appeared again and again. He'd forwarded them to the local manager, demanded explanations, even sent an investigator once. Each time the answer was the same: we treat everyone equally. These people are exaggerating. But something inside him refused to believe that. Something deeper, a memory of watching his father get turned away from a restaurant decades ago, told him there was truth in those accusations. So, he decided to see it with his own eyes. Adrian stepped through the door just as the clock struck 8. The bell above it jingled faintly, but no one looked up to greet him. A tall woman with thin lips and sharper eyes stood behind the counter, her gaze slicing toward him before she turned away. He approached slowly, offering a polite smile. "Good morning," he said. She didn't smile back. "We're full," she muttered, even though 3 empty booths were clearly visible. "I don't mind waiting," Adrian replied gently. Her lips twisted. "Suit yourself." He stood there for nearly 2 minutes before anyone bothered to offer him a seat. A young server approached, barely making eye contact. "You can sit over there," she said, gesturing toward the booth closest to the restroom. A table most diners avoided. Adrian took the seat without complaint. He had expected this. It was part of the plan. What he hadn't expected, though, was how quickly the room shifted around him. The chatter lowered. People glanced sideways. And when a well-dressed couple walked in 5 minutes later, they were greeted with wide smiles, ushered immediately to the best table by the window. The woman behind the counter returned, flipping a menu onto his table with a careless flick. "Here," she said. "Don't take too long." Adrian studied the menu but already knew what he'd order. "Just a black coffee and a club sandwich," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you can afford that?" It was a jab meant to humiliate. And it worked, judging by the smirk that passed between her and the manager standing nearby. Adrian didn't rise to the bait. He'd been underestimated before. He knew the power in staying silent. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The coffee that arrived was cold, the sandwich barely edible. It was a message, and he understood it perfectly. When Adrian politely mentioned that the food seemed old, the manager, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent sneer, strode over. "This isn't fine dining," he said loudly. "People like you should be grateful we're serving you at all." A hush fell over the room. Conversations paused. Adrian felt the weight of a dozen eyes on him, some sympathetic, most indifferent. He took a photo of the sandwich quietly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "What are you doing?" the woman hissed. "Just documenting my meal," he replied evenly. "Then get out," the manager barked. "We don't need your kind here." Those words, "your kind," were not new to Adrian. They were the same words his father had heard decades ago, the same words that had fueled his ambition and built his empire. But hearing them now, in one of his own restaurants, burned deeper than he had imagined. Before he could respond, the situation escalated. The manager snatched Adrian's wallet from the table, tossing its contents onto the floor. Coins rolled beneath the booths, crumpled bills scattered like trash. "Pick it up," he sneered. "Then pay for your meal and leave." Adrian knelt slowly, his movements deliberate, his dignity unbroken. To the onlookers, he was just another man humiliated for daring to exist where he wasn't wanted. But to Adrian this was the final piece of evidence he needed. He stood, placed a fresh $20 bill on the counter, and said quietly, "You have no idea what you've just done." "Is that a threat?" the manager scoffed. "No," Adrian said, "a promise." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room felt colder. Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by the low rumble of distant thunder. Inside, the game was only just beginning. Adrian walked out without another word, leaving behind the scattered coins and the stunned silence. As he stepped into the street, he pulled out his phone and typed a single message: "Phase 1 complete. Prepare legal entry." because Adrian Clark was not a man easily dismissed. And those who had laughed at him minutes ago were about to learn that the stranger they had mocked was not a nobody. He was their employer, their judge, and soon, their reckoning. The next morning, the Summit Grill opened its doors as usual, the same dull clink of utensils and hum of conversation filling the space. But beneath the surface, an invisible clock had begun to tick. Adrian had spent the night in motion, activating a plan that had been quietly prepared for months. A plan designed not just to expose, but to dismantle. By 8:15 a.m., 3 black sedans rolled up silently to the curb outside. They bore no logos, no signs of their significance, but the men and women who stepped out carried an air of precision and authority. Among them was Theresa Vance, Clark Hospitality Group's chief legal counsel, her charcoal, gray suit immaculate, her expression carved from stone. Behind her followed 2 senior executives, a compliance officer, and a state health inspector, all summoned under Adrian's single text. Inside, the cafe staff carried on as if nothing had happened. Jackson Reed, the manager, was laughing loudly with a group of regulars, basking in the comfort of his small kingdom. Vidya, the woman from the counter, moved briskly between tables, her clipped tone as dismissive as ever. Neither of them noticed the inconspicuous figure in the corner booth. Adrian, dressed in the same worn jacket and boots, calmly stirring a cup of coffee. "Morning, sir," Jackson said sarcastically as he walked by. "Back for more gourmet dining?" Adrian didn't respond. He didn't have to. The bell over the door jingled and the legal team stepped inside. Their presence shifted the room's energy instantly. Conversations faltered. Vidya frowned. Jackson's smile evaporated as Theresa approached the counter, her badge flashing in the fluorescent light. "Good morning," she said crisply. "I'm Theresa Vance, legal counsel for Clark Hospitality Group. This establishment is now under formal investigation." "Unvis? What?" Jackson scoffed. "You can't just—" "Oh, I assure you we can," she interrupted. "We have documented evidence of racial discrimination, food safety violations, and multiple breaches of company policy. As of this moment, your employment is suspended pending a full legal review." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Customers whispered. Vidya's hands trembled as she tried to form a response. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. "We haven't done anything wrong." Theresa raised an eyebrow. "Really? Would you like me to play the footage?" From her briefcase, she pulled a tablet and pressed play. Security camera recordings filled the screen. Jackson intentionally serving spoiled meals to minority patrons. Vidya charging fabricated service fees. Staff mocking customers under their breath. The evidence was irrefutable. The color drained from Jackson's face. "Who are you people?" he demanded. At that moment, Adrian rose from his booth and walked toward the counter. His steps were steady, deliberate, every eye in the diner following his movement. He removed the cap from his head, straightened his posture, and looked directly at Jackson. "My name," he said calmly, "is Adrian Clark." The silence that followed was absolute. Vidya's mouth fell open. Jackson blinked, uncomprehending, until the realization struck, and when it did his knees nearly buckled. "C. Clark," he whispered. "A's in Clark Hospitality." "The same," Adrian replied. "The company that owns this restaurant. The company that signs your paychecks. The company you've been disgracing every single day you step behind that counter." The room erupted into gasps. A couple in the corner clapped softly. Others stared at Jackson and Vidya with disgust. It was no longer a cafe. It was a courtroom, and the sentence was being delivered. Jackson's bravado returned in a desperate burst. "You can't do this," he said, voice trembling. "We didn't know who you were. If we had." "That's exactly the point," Adrian cut in. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. But you showed me something far more valuable than respect. You showed me the truth about how you behave when you think no one important is watching." His words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Theresa stepped forward again. "For the record," she said, "we have collected 27 witness statements in the last 24 hours alone. Multiple customers have come forward describing identical behavior. Combined with video evidence and internal complaints, we have more than enough to pursue criminal and civil charges." The health inspector cleared his throat. "And based on preliminary findings, this establishment is being shut down effective immediately. The level of food contamination presents a serious public health risk." Gasps rippled through the room once more. A woman at a nearby table muttered, "I knew something was off with the food here." Another shook her head. "Disgusting." Vidya looked around frantically. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I have children. I need this job." Adrian's expression didn't soften. "The mothers and fathers you humiliated have children too," he said quietly. "The people you refused to serve with basic decency. They have families. They were just trying to eat." Tears welled in her eyes. Jackson, meanwhile, was still clinging to arrogance. "This is America," he shouted. "You can't just waltz in here and ruin people's lives." Adrian met his glare without flinching. America, he said, is also the place where actions have consequences. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers entered the diner, summoned by Theresa's team. Jackson's confidence collapsed as one of them read his rights aloud. He struggled, shouting about lawsuits and wrongful termination, but it was no use. Vidya sank to the floor sobbing. The remaining customers sat in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. They had witnessed countless small acts of cruelty in this place, ignored them, dismissed them, convinced themselves they were none of their business. Now, those acts were on full display, and so was their own silence. Adrian turned to them. Every one of you who watched and said nothing, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. You're part of this too. Every time you choose comfort over conscience, you feed the roots of hatred. Change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough. His words struck deeper than any legal threat. Heads bowed. A few people wiped away tears. Others simply stared at the floor, unwilling to meet his gaze. As the police led Jackson and Vidya away, Adrian walked back toward the counter. He looked around the room one final time, taking in the cracked tiles, the flickering light, the faded photos on the wall. This place had once meant something, not to him, but to his late mother. It was her dream, her vision of a place where everyone was welcome. And now, it would be rebuilt in her name. This isn't the end, Adrian said softly. It's the beginning of something better. Outside the rain had returned, washing the grime from the sidewalks, streaking the cafe's windows clean. And as the last of the customers filed out into the gray morning, the Summit Grill stood empty. A monument to what had been, and a promise of what was yet to come. The following weeks transformed the Summit Grill from a stain on Adrian Clark's company into a stage for redemption. The once disgraced cafe was shuttered for renovations, its windows covered with brown paper, its familiar neon sign switched off. But behind those closed doors, a new vision was taking shape, one that would honor his mother's dream and ensure that no one would ever again experience what he had witnessed. Adrian visited the site almost every day. Construction crews gutted the interior, stripping away decades of grime and neglect. The kitchen was replaced with state-of-the-art equipment. The seating area was redesigned to be welcoming and inclusive, with warm lighting and open spaces that invited conversation. A mural would cover the back wall, a tribute to the civil rights activists who had fought for dignity in places just like this. At the center of the mural, a quote from his mother: "A meal is not a privilege, it's a right." But the physical transformation was only part of the plan. Adrian knew that systemic change required more than new paint and furniture. It required people, the right people, to carry that vision forward. So he made a decision that would raise eyebrows across the entire hospitality industry. He opened every single position in the new Summit Grill to applicants from underserved communities. Formerly incarcerated individuals, refugees, victims of workplace discrimination, all were given priority consideration. He partnered with nonprofits to offer training and mentorship, ensuring that every employee was equipped not just with skills, but with purpose. At the same time, Adrian implemented sweeping internal policies across his company. Mandatory anti-discrimination training became a cornerstone of employment. Secret shopper programs were expanded to include bias detection audits. Complaints would no longer be handled by local managers but by an independent ethics board, and every employee from dishwasher to district manager would sign a new code of conduct emphasizing dignity, respect, and accountability. The decision sparked conversation and controversy. Some critics accused Adrian of overcorrecting, of turning his company into a social experiment. Others praised him for setting a new industry standard. Adrian didn't care about the noise. He knew that real change always came with resistance. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into the renovation, Adrian received an unexpected visitor. Estrella, the woman who had spoken up for him during that humiliating morning, was waiting for him outside the construction site. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me," she said as he approached. "How could I forget?" Adrian smiled. "You were the only one who spoke up." She shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It didn't feel like much at the time. I just couldn't stay silent." "And that," Adrian replied, "is exactly how change begins." She handed him the folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from people in the community who had experienced discrimination at the Summit Grill over the years. Some were heartbreaking: a young black couple who were refused service on their anniversary, an elderly Latino man who was charged double for the same meal, a Muslim woman told to eat somewhere else. Many had never spoken out before. Adrian read every word. "These people deserve an apology," Estrella said softly. "Not just a new restaurant." Adrian nodded. "They'll get more than that." He reached out to each person personally. Some meetings were emotional, others quiet. But all shared a common thread, a deep wound left by casual cruelty, and a cautious hope that maybe, Just maybe things could change. Adrian listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it wasn't with corporate jargon or scripted apologies, it was with sincerity, and a promise to do better. Meanwhile, the legal fallout from Jackson and Vidya's actions was unfolding in the background. Jackson faced multiple charges, including assault and civil rights violations, and his trial became a local media spectacle. Vidya cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealing that such discriminatory behavior had been quietly tolerated, even encouraged, by a handful of mid-level managers across the company. Adrian used the revelations as an opportunity to purge the organization of anyone who shared those values. Racism isn't a customer service issue, he said at a company-wide meeting. It's a moral failure. And there is no place for moral failure here. By the time the new Summit Grill was ready to open, the story had captured national attention. News outlets ran segments on Adrian's undercover operation. Social media buzzed with support and debate. The grand reopening was no longer just a business event, it had become a symbol of accountability and second chances. On the morning of the reopening, a line stretched around the block. Reporters jostled for position, microphones ready. Activists and community leaders stood shoulder to shoulder with curious locals. And at the center of it all, Adrian stood beneath the new sign, a bold, clean script that read, "The Summit Grill. Everyone's welcome." As the doors opened, Adrian greeted the first customers personally. Among them was an elderly woman named Rosa, the wife of the man who had been refused service decades ago. She smiled through tears as Adrian escorted her to a seat by the window, the same spot where her husband had once been turned away. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said, her voice trembling. "Neither did I," Adrian admitted. "But we're here now, and it's because people like you never stopped believing we could be better." Throughout the day, the restaurant buzzed with energy and joy. The new staff, diverse, enthusiastic, and deeply committed, moved with purpose and pride. Customers lingered over meals, conversations flowed easily, and the space felt alive with something far greater than food. It felt like healing. Late in the afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, Estrella returned. This time she was joined by her teenage son. "I wanted him to see this," she said, "to know that speaking up matters." Adrian knelt slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "It always matters," he said gently. "Even when it feels like it doesn't." As evening fell, Adrian stood outside the restaurant watching the city glow under the streetlights. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. The wounds of the past hadn't vanished. Some never would. But they had begun to heal. And in their place, something stronger had taken root, a belief that dignity could be restored, that justice could be more than a courtroom verdict, that change could start with a single voice refusing to be silent. Inside, a staff member flipped the sign on the door from "closed for renovations" to "open." And in that simple gesture, a new chapter began. Not just for the Summit Grill, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Weeks turned into months, and the Summit Grill flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What had once been a modest, overlooked diner had become a symbol, not just of redemption, but of what could happen when justice met intention. The story of the "boss in disguise" spread far beyond the city. News outlets revisited it repeatedly, universities invited Adrian to speak about leadership and accountability. And customers from across the country made pilgrimages just to eat a sandwich in a place that now stood for something larger than food. Yet for Adrian, the true victory wasn't in the headlines or the profits. It was in the subtle, almost invisible changes. The kind that revealed themselves slowly over time. It was in the way new employees treated every customer with the same warmth, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. It was in the way regular patrons started greeting strangers, striking up conversations they might have once avoided. It was in the way people lingered in the cafe long after finishing their meals, as if unwilling to let go of the space's quiet message, "You belong here." On a chilly autumn morning, Adrian returned to the diner alone. He slipped in unnoticed, choosing a seat in the same corner booth where he had once been humiliated. The place was alive now. Laughter, the clinking of coffee cups, the low hum of conversation, the smell of fresh bread and roasted beans filled the air. A young server new to the job approached him with a smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "Can I get you something?" "Just a coffee," Adrian replied. "Black, fresh as you can make it." "Of course," she said, hurrying off. He looked around, taking it all in. The mural on the back wall caught his eye, his mother's words etched boldly across it. Beneath the quote was a small plaque bearing another inscription. One Adrian had insisted on adding himself, dedicated to those who were silenced, ignored, and mistreated. "May we never repeat the mistakes that hurt them." As he sipped his coffee, Adrian noticed something else. The same young server was now speaking with a man at another table, older, with worn clothes and tired eyes. She treated him with the same kindness she had shown Adrian, There was no hesitation, no judgment, just respect. It was a small moment, but to Adrian, it meant everything. It was proof that culture could change, that prejudice could be unlearned, that humanity could prevail. He finished his coffee and stood to leave, but before stepping out, he turned back for one last look. The Summit Grill was no longer just a restaurant, it was a living testament to the power of accountability, the importance of empathy, and the simple truth that dignity is not earned, it is owed. As the door closed behind him and the city breeze brushed his face, Adrian Clarke walked away with a quiet smile. Justice had been served, but more importantly so had hope.